You want your video settings put at 1080p HD. Resolution is 1920 by 1080. And your frame rate, I typically set to either to 30p. If you know you're going to be using slow motion in your video, set it to 60p. It makes for smoother slow motion. In Final Cut, I keep the codec at Apple ProRes 422. We always begin with the Raise a Hood video animation, which is linked in the description below for you to download, and this is always put at the beginning of every Raise a Hood video. For the animation, it should be 7.12 seconds long, which is the full length of the animation once you download it. And then at the end, you want to add this fade to black. Add that at the end of the animation, and then it will go into your title page, which is what gives the description for the repair. This is another standard that we use, is the paper textured background, which in Final Cut Pro can be found under the titles and generators sidebar up at the upper left hand corner. If you do not have this in your editing platform, you can download it in the description linked below. Standard font is Arial Bold, and that is set to 120 point font. And then the subtitle of what the repair is set to 90 point font. And this is set after the animation to 2 seconds. And then from there, it will go into the step title page. Step description and footer are placed on the page. You set the background of the description and the footer to 50% opacity so you can see through it while it's playing in the video. Right there, as you can see, it's translucent just enough to see through it. Default font here for both the description and the footer is 60 point, and always set your color to the Raise a Hood green, which is described in our Raise a Hood video structure doc that is available for download. Or you can enter in the hex code or the Pantone number. The introductory step slide is always set to 1.15 seconds. Goes from our title page into the step description into the video. And we always have the step description and footer overlaid for the duration of the video until you get to the next step. Then it will change, but it is always there for the viewer to see no matter what step they're in, so they know where they are in the repair. And in the footer description, you always put the appropriate information, so size of the nut or the bolt that's being used, tool size, etc., followed by the description of what it is. So in this case, 19mm lug nuts, and then the quantity is at the end in parentheses, so 5 lug nuts are being removed from the wheel. And anytime a torque spec is involved, you will write it out like this. So 14mm bolts at 48 foot-pounds, and then in parentheses is the quantity. Try to avoid using inch pounds to avoid confusion, so we don't want somebody misinterpreting inch pounds for foot-pounds when they have to torque. We always want to put the accurate torque spec up and always use foot-pounds. And so the step chapter slide is always placed in between steps. So here we go from step 9 to step 10 for 1.5 seconds. This is up on the screen, and then it goes into the next step. For transitioning between cuts, you do not use jump cuts. You always use cross dissolve. So it looks like this. And that way the viewer knows that time is elapsing during the step through a cross dissolve. Target time for steps is around 5 to 10 seconds. More complex steps will of course be longer, but on average you want steps to be around 5 to 10 seconds long, and so that becomes the target compression of, let's say, a 60-minute repair should end up being about a 3 to 5 minute long video at most. When there's a sequence of nuts or bolts being tightened, you can show those rather quickly with quick transitions in between, a second or two of each bolt being tightened, and quickly go to the next one, so the viewer gets a sense of nuts and bolts being tightened, but don't want to make them sit there and watch every single bolt being tightened from beginning to end. You always want to provide as much information as possible for the viewer, so sometimes you might need to use graphics and overlays and diagrams. So in this case, I was displaying where the O2 sensor is located under the vehicle. So I start out by showing the diagram, which goes into another diagram, and then I go into an overlay, orienting the viewer as to where the repair is occurring. So use this arrow showing front of vehicle, and this overlay is up for 4 seconds, and then it goes into me then moving forward in slow motion, so it's easy for the viewer to see what is going on, and moving towards this where the sensor is located. Locating the sensor and then zooming in. And then doing an overlay of circles with descriptions of where the repair is occurring. All RaH Hood videos will have an added voiceover after they are edited. But from time to time, you're going to want to add audio that you gather while shooting the repair, as it could be helpful for the viewer. So in this instance, I used the audio of a sound that the car made that instigated the repair. You can also use audio from the mechanic when they're talking through the repair, as they can sometimes provide better information than a voiceover, as they're the ones who are doing the repair on the spot and can give tips and tricks to the viewer.
And there's 3 stakes here. You can see it's staked in. You're gonna have to pull these back.
For adding a voiceover, your goal is to add an extra layer of clarity and detail. You only want to give necessary and helpful information, keeping in mind that the video is the main content for the viewer. Here's an example of a voiceover where only necessary narration is given, along with helpful information about tools and the procedure of what's going on.
Now again, Brian's using a couple of air tools here. If you did not have this air tool, which is frankly an inexpensive air tool, you could do that with a chisel and a hammer, or even a hacksaw. With a little bit of oil or lubricating oil, he's impacting that out. Now, if this is an older vehicle, sometimes they don't come out as easily as you need. Here he's using an actual acetylene torch. If you don't have an acetylene torch, you can use MAP gas, which is found at your local hardware store. That heat will expand the outer area, loosen it up just enough that you can push it through. And there it is.
When adding a voiceover, it's something you'll have to practice, as it takes time to get good at, and you'll find that writing a script for guidance is beneficial, but you'll want to speak in a way that sounds as natural as possible. For the end credit, the file is linked in the description below, and we always add this at the end of RaH Hood repair videos. It's a Photoshop document, so what I do is I just bring in Photoshop, and then it's blank with mechanic and videographer and editor, so you can type in mechanic's name and then your name at the end credit, and then I shorten the length to 3 seconds, and there's my end credit. So it goes from the video into the end credit like that. When your edit is complete, and for exporting your video, go up to share in the upper right hand corner, settings, I always choose better quality. Make sure it's set to computer, and that creates an MP4. You always want to make sure it's set to computer to create an MP4 file. And then resolution is set to max, 1920 by 1080. And when the video is done exporting, you're going to want to just watch it one more time to make sure that it's accurate and there's no more mistakes that you made. I always check to make sure that the step description and footer are correct. There's no misspellings. Make sure my overlays look good, and then when you are satisfied that your edit looks good, then you're going to send it in to RaH Hood.